Coming to you from the Hudson Media Group studios, this is Talking Politics, and I am the professor, Fernando Uribe. There's a lot to discuss, so let's get started. Here's what I'm thinking about right now. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've talked about it repeatedly on this program and also on my weekly podcast. And while I am very much a fan of law enforcement, I have a lot of friends, brave men and women who don a uniform every single day to keep our community safe and orderly. There are some bad cops among us, folks, and a story I wanted to share with you that just came out this week on NJ.com should give all of us a moment of pause. Only because, really, to start off with, I've been sort of vocally denouncing this practice for many, many months, and also it's one that, even though it gets me a little bit of scrutiny online, it is with merit, though. And let me just give you a couple of the facts here just to sort of unravel it. So there's a story published this week by New Jersey Advanced Media via NJ.com that cops in a New Jersey town are accused of a ticket blitz targeting minorities, and now the mayor is indeed calling for an independent investigation. So let me just give you a little bit of a brief background here. Now, the mayor of North Brunswick, New Jersey, this week called for an independent investigation of the Township Police Department following repeated claims for the past year that officers were indeed targeting Black and Latino neighborhoods to reach ticket quotas. Wow, what a shocker. Now, the alleged practice allegedly involved paying officers overtime as a financial reward for racking up tickets against Black and Hispanic residents. Now, Mayor Francis Mac Womack told NJ Advanced Media this past week, quote, "Any allegation of this type, no matter how unfounded I believe it to be, deserves to be independently investigated by an outsider." A couple more facts here, folks, just to let you know. Now, Womack said that Police Chief Joseph Battaglia and Township Business Administrator Catherine Monzo are involved in selecting the investigator. Now, Battaglia and Monzo were not immediately available to comment this past week with NJ.com. Now, veteran North Brunswick police officer Michael Campbell first brought up allegations of racism within the department when he filed a discrimination lawsuit in 2018. Campbell, who is Black, claimed he was, quote, subjected to racist and racially charged language, which included inappropriate nicknames due to his background. Now, the lawsuit, which names the police chief, the police director, a lieutenant, a captain, and several unnamed defendants, is pending in Middlesex County Superior Court. Now, Campbell's attorney, James A. Lewis of South Orange, was not immediately available for comments as well. Now, last week, Campbell went on to say that him and other township police officers who were not named told News 4 New York that white police officers abused the overtime policy and hunted minorities, especially on the border of North Brunswick and New Brunswick. Well, folks, listen, again, you can certainly check out the story on NJ.com, but really at the heart of this is what I've always talked about when it comes to municipalities. Whether it's checkpoints at the end of the month, whether it's ticket blitzes that go on, they're just unfair practices. And listen, I understand that people want to turn around and say, well, Fernando, don't you believe in a safe community or orderly roads? I'm all for that, folks. So I don't want you to sort of think that I'm just sort of being anti-police, because I'm not. I donate to the PBA. I have plenty of friends, not just in Hudson County departments, but throughout the state that are admirable and hardworking police officers. And these men and women deserve a lot of the recognition. But what I'm not going to do is sweep bad behavior under the rug. So whether it's checkpoints at the end of the month, whether it's these ticket blitzes, folks, these things happen, okay? So whenever I've read commentary online for this program or on my weekly podcast or any of my social media, I immediately get scrutinized or even vilified about the fact that perhaps I'm viewed as being anti-police and that I'm sort of perpetuating a climate and a culture via my presence and my job within the media to sort of enhance this. I'm not doing that, okay? I'm not anti-police. And anyone who tells you otherwise is just full of you-know-what. I've talked about it, again, consistently on this program, all right? Yes, listen, we should all follow, the mandated speed limits that are implemented in not just sort of our local townships, but county roads and even state roads. So I'm not going to be here and tell you to go speed all over the place and make this like the Fast and Furious franchise. Of course not. I don't want chaos and mayhem on our roads. I don't want people driving while intoxicated during holiday weekends or at the end of the month. Of course not. I want you to take an Uber or Lyft when you're going out and enjoying nightlife and hospitality. But what I'm not going to stay quiet about is the idea that these checkpoints are always on the up and up. and that the municipalities all over the state engage in these very shady practices. Do you think North Brunswick is the only police department, or some of these officers are the only ones in the entire state of New Jersey that are doing this? Of course not. You know it's happening everywhere. Now, I'm not going to say it's an overwhelming problem facing motorists and taxpayers, but it's a significant problem nonetheless. Folks, the chatter that's always gone on about checkpoints and sort of police practices is not, it isn't anything new here. So for me to come on this program, and listen, two things I am very much a proponent of when it comes to this show and any media that I do. I'm intellectually honest, and B, I'm philosophically consistent. And on this issue, I'm telling you right now, I've never screamed louder than I ever have when it comes to this. And listen, I've talked about it during holiday weekends, during Thanksgiving Eve, during the end of the month, during New Year's, whatever. Folks, I understand these checkpoints somehow are justified when it comes to keeping the road safe. But believe me when I tell you, these are nothing but cash cows for local municipalities. And I'm not trying to throw municipalities under the bus, but locally here, folks, whether it's townships like Bayonne, townships like Secaucus, or even, let's say, southern Bergen County, Fort Lee, Fairview, whatever. Take your pick. Folks, these practices happen. And the idea that they don't is just, listen, either you're just blatantly ignorant or you're naive. And I'm not trying to be malicious here. I'm not trying to sort of like engage in name calling, but you have to be completely oblivious to just not realize that these practices happen. So, kudos to the mayor there in North Brunswick for taking the initiative, because for the most part, when you hear about misconduct like this, it tends to get swept under the rug. So kudos again to the mayor for really sort of tackling this problem. And I wish that more mayors across the state would do the very same thing, because I'm fairly certain that it happens in many more municipalities than you think. And I've seen it all over here, folks. Whether it's scrutinizing the speed limit on Kennedy Boulevard, whether it's on Boulevard East up here in North Hudson, between North Bergen, going all the way down to Weehawken into Hoboken, or whether you're on Patterson Plank Road going into Secaucus, or whether you're on Kearney Avenue in the western part of Hudson County. Folks, I understand. Police officers have a tough job to do, and the last thing they need is sort of like the aggravation that sometimes drivers put on them. But folks, let's keep an eye out, and let's raise some hell about these unfair police practices. Again, I'm not anti-police. I'm anti-bad policy, and that's what this is. So, again, whether it's North Brunswick or any other municipality in New Jersey, let's be vigilant, and let's make sure we don't give any more of our hard-earned money to these municipalities that tend to sort of victimize us at every turn, whether it's with checkpoints or ticket blitzes. Folks, it's real, and it's happening, and we need to raise awareness about it. Talk about it on your social media. Talk about it to your friends and neighbors. Go to your local town halls. Go to your local municipal meetings. Address town councils. Address your board of commissioners and tell them that these practices have to be scrutinized. And if they're happening, they need to stop as soon as possible. And trust me, folks, this is a public service I take considerable pride in. And that's what I'm thinking about right now. During this week's edition of the 3-time award-winning podcast, Talk on the Hudson, which you can listen to live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talk on the Hudson, was noted immigration attorney and activist Carolina Curbelo. Now, let me just sort of preface this by saying that Carolina is a very dear friend of mine, but someone that does a lot of admirable work within the immigration law community. And she was my guest this week for over 95 minutes. And here are some highlights I think you'll find very interesting during our conversation. First and foremost, I asked Carolina about sort of like the current political climate involving immigration law, and quite frankly, what tends to sort of happen when it comes to immigration cases, and what needs to be done better at the federal level when it comes to scrutinizing immigration law, whether it be at the state level or even at the federal level. Let's check out what she had to say about it.
Carolina, immigration reform and immigration law is a really complicated issue. As I alluded to earlier in my opening monologue, it's easy for me perhaps to talk about immigration law when, as a son of immigrants, my parents 50 years ago, my mom left communism and tyranny in Cuba. My dad left a pretty mediocre quality of life in Colombia. Again, this is no disrespect to my fellow Colombians. It's just the truth. 50 years ago, the Colombian economy wasn't great. They both came here legally under different parameters and circumstances. The parameters that my parents immigrated here under no longer exist. I get that. But even people like my parents, Carolina, they're concerned about the fact that we're seeing such an influx and that illegal immigration is still a pervasive problem. You, as an immigration attorney, I'm sure, have a lot to say about the current immigration law. And I want to give you the floor to at least give us an update, or at least how you view current immigration law and why it's so challenging.
I guess I guess there's a lot to talk about with immigration, but I would rather, if you want to narrow it a bit, I think one of the things that I would like to stress first is, as an advocate and as an attorney, that it is very important that we there needs to be immigration court reform right now. And I don't know how, if your audience is aware how the immigration court system is set up. It is not currently under what is Article 1 of the United States Constitution like our other courts, our federal courts are. The immigration court, and if you may, if I'm allowed to, basically it's housed under the executive branch under the Department of Justice. Department of Justice, there is another, I guess, an agency or a branch which is called the Executive Office of Immigration Review. And so immigration court sits under the Department of Justice, under the executive branch, okay? And the problem I have, and a lot of my colleagues that practice immigration law have with this, is that the chief prosecutor of the United States government, which is the Attorney General, currently William Barr, and his predecessor, Jeff Sessions, I mean, the Attorney General gets to select who becomes an immigration judge, okay? So judges are technically employees of the Department of Justice, okay? And honestly, judges should be able to exercise judicial independence.
As you can tell, Carolina has an encyclopedic knowledge of the law, and she really applied it during our conversation, at least in trying to explain to my audience on the podcast about what tends to happen in immigration court, and for the most part, what could be sort of improved upon at the federal level. Moving along, during our next highlight here, we talked about DACA and certainly the DREAM Act, and as it was signed via an executive order by President Obama in 2014, what's happened since then, and quite frankly, what could be the ultimate verdict, as the Supreme Court heard the case in early November, and a decision should be published by the early summer. Let's see what she had to say about DACA and, of course, the DREAM Act moving forward.
Just to make sure I have my facts straight and my dates. Now, DACA, again, was an executive order signed by then President Obama in 2014, correct?
That's correct. That was
okay.
An executive order.
Okay, now, based on that executive order, I don't have it in front of me, I haven't read it in a while, so it's my understanding that that executive order had an expiration date on it. So what you're telling me is once that expiration date was reached, then it was within the providence of then Attorney General Jeff Sessions to either continue it, or did the president let it expire, or did the president just say, it's up to Congress to renew this? Because I think a lot of our listeners tonight remember the executive order being signed, but then whether or not it expired at a certain point, as you mentioned, Jeff Sessions maybe chose not to renew it, or the president, chose not to renew it, and then passed the buck and said, okay, Congress, it's up to you guys to handle it. And when they chose not to, that's why it went up to the Supreme Court. Is that where we're at right now?
Yeah, I as far as whether it expired or not, all I know, I just have from my notes and my recollection is that, the current administration decided to basically end the DACA program, even though there were campaign promises by President Trump that, he would protect, DACA recipients, AKA, dreamers. And basically what ensued is that when the government announced that they were ending the program, the other branch, which is, the acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, basically said Citizenship and Immigration Services, they're not going to be processing they're going to reject these initial DACA applications, renewal applications. And basically what happened was in the days and months that followed that, there were a lot of multiple lawsuits that started to challenge the Trump administration for terminating DACA. And later on, we had nationwide injunctions. And at some point, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which we call USCIS, was required, due to these nationwide injunctions, to basically accept and continue to process DACA renewal applications, okay, for folks who were being affected during the time of the pendency of the litigation, right? And it's made its way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court heard it, I believe, November of last year. And basically, we're talking about the fate of about 700,000 young immigrants, dreamers, who were brought here illegally by their parents, okay? And their fate is on the table. The Supreme Court's going to be deciding that this summer. And, my position on this is that, DACA is a similar program to other programs we've had in the past.
She had a lot to say for over 95 minutes, and of course, you can listen to the episode in its entirety, once again, by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talking to Hudson. You can download it and listen to it anywhere at any time from any PC, Mac, smartphone, or tablet. Again, she had a lot to say about the current crisis involving immigration law, and of course, what awaits DACA this summer when the Supreme Court rules on it once and for all. And now to some local stories here that should hopefully pique your interest. And folks, a very interesting story came out this week via The Atlantic. And if you have had a chance to read this very reputable online publication, well, the headline should definitely grab your attention here. Now, this past week, Christian Ramos, a former member of the Hispanic Congressional Caucus, published a very interesting op-ed this week. And I'll sort of give you some facts here just to sort of unravel it a little bit. And she goes on to say that Latino support for President Trump is indeed real. Now, let me just give you a little bit of a background here as to what sort of pertains to this headline. Now, I think it certainly could be argued that the president has done everything he possibly can to anger many Latino voters or potential voters throughout his first term. And his support among this sort of crucial portion of the electorate, believe it or not, remains surprisingly consistent. Now, after the 2016 election, exit polls that were analyzed by the Pew Research Center, which, by the way, and just give you a sort of a disclaimer on this, in terms of perhaps one of being the most reputable exit polling type of institutions that there is in the country, folks, trust me, the Pew Research Center is as good as it gets. It's nonpartisan, and they go about really accumulating their data in a very precise and really, I think, in a very expert sort of way. So believe me, when the Pew Research Center is giving you a poll, you want to trust it. And surprisingly, after the 2016 election, 28% of Latino voters came out to support then candidate Donald Trump. Well, 4 years later, as it is election season now in 2020, that number has risen to almost 34%. Now, you might say to yourself, well, it's only a 6% bump, Fernando. What's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal, and it should worry Democrats. And I'll sort of give you a little bit more context here. Now, the percentage, again, isn't high, but consider what the number means for the Democratic Party. Now, Democrats, at least in the displeasure that they have with the president over the past 3 years, has not really led to a significant increase for support of the Democratic Party. And this is something that, and I've talked about it on the program before. Now, Democrats lost the 2016 election with only 66% of the Latino vote. Now, today's 65% of registered Latino voters who are Democrats have somewhat of a positive view of the Democratic Party. But based on exit polling from the past 3 election cycles, it can be estimated that Democrats are going to need somewhere between 72 to 75% of the vote to take back the White House. And folks, I don't see that happening. And the reason I don't is, and I've talked about it before, when it comes to the Hispanic community. We tend to be very traditional. So whether you want to call us Hispanic or Latino or Latina, not Latinx, like that's just a convoluted and nonsensical sort of term, all right? But within our community, folks, whether it's people of my parents' generation or individuals like myself who are over 40 or people younger than I, a lot of Hispanics and Latinos around the country aren't subscribing to a lot of the platform that is today's modern Democratic Party. And I'll sort of give you a little bit of a perspective about what that consists of. Listen, a lot of Hispanics and Latinos across the United States don't care about identity politics. They don't care about, the climate hysteria that seems to be perpetuated by politicians and journalists and other advocates, okay? Latinos and Hispanics don't care about being woke or whatever that means, okay? They're not concerned with this fixation on political correctness, all right, or social engineering, or this sort of cancel culture that's become so pervasive, not only in social media, but I think really in sort of the court of public opinion, or the idea of policing thought, or sort of, multicultural gibberish that really sort of engulfed the Democratic Party. A lot of Hispanics and Latinos, folks, they don't subscribe to this nonsense. They just really don't. And again, and I've talked about it on the program before, the president lacks decorum. The president lacks civility. Okay, I'm over 40. I've at least had the opportunity to live through at least a good amount of presidencies. Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and George H.W. Bush that I remember quite vividly. And of course, all the aforementioned, I'm not agree with all of their policies, had a certain type of tactfulness to their delivery. They were presidential. Yes, folks, the 45th president is far from being presidential, whether it's tantrums he has on Twitter or tantrums he has in public. I understand that, listen, he can gravitate and that's appealing to some people. And believe it or not, I find it funny sometimes. So I'm not going to be a hypocrite on this show. But for a lot of Hispanics and Latinos, the bottom line is throughout the country, whether it's through job growth, whether it's the increase and sort of the improvement of our 401ks, whether it's small businesses being created, whether it's the fact that 10 million less people are on food stamps right now. 10 million less people are dependent upon public assistance. These are the things that matter to Hispanics and Latinos. And you know what? For a lot of them, they may not say it publicly. They may say it privately at the dinner table, even during the past holiday season. They may even talk about it in their kitchens. They may not talk about it publicly. They may not even put a Trump 2020 bumper sticker on their vehicles. But privately, they'll just say, you know what? I don't like the guy, but I can deal with him because he's getting things done. And that could just be enough, folks, for Hispanics and Latinos coming up in 2020. And if Democrats don't get their act together, they're going to lose a very valuable and, for the most part, a usually reliable part of the electorate that Democrats have come to depend on. As I said, 6% might not be a very big number, but it's enough to worry Democrats, and it should, as 2020 continues to heat up right now during this election cycle. And now to another local story, and one that is not only sort of statewide in nature, but also federal as well. Now, this past week, folks, Republicans in both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate introduced legislation that would block federal funds from states that allow illegal immigrants to obtain driver's licenses. And again, of course, this is sort of the latest move in the escalating fight that exists between sanctuary state laws. Now, the Stop Greenlighting Driver's Licenses for Illegal Immigrants Act was introduced this past week, and ultimately the goal of this legislation is to block funds to sanctuary states, which limit local cooperation with federal immigration authorities, and thus those that give licenses to illegal immigrants. Now, specifically, it would halt Justice Department grants, in particular those awarded under the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, which is a top source of federal criminal justice funding for states. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here in New Jersey, the Garden State receives a certain amount of federal funding, whether it's for community policing programs, for curriculum in our public schools, or even other type of programs, which include, for example, the Office for the Prevention of Violence Against Women. And you know what? I get it. These are vital grants and vital funds. But here in New Jersey, ladies and gentlemen, what Governor Phil Murphy and Attorney General Gabriel Grewal are doing is sort of like the typical liberal playbook. You know, let's cut our nose to spite our face. And that's what's happening here with this sort of attempt in sort of perpetuating a sanctuary state policy. And of course, we've seen many mayors throughout New Jersey that have enacted sanctuary city policies. Look no further than Hudson County's largest city in Jersey City, with Stephen Fulop declaring Jersey City only 4 years ago as a sanctuary city. Now, I get it, ladies and gentlemen, that these are big causes for liberals. And I understand that, you know what, the federal government, for the very first time in a while, is sort of, you know, looking to enforce federal law. Now, this fight that seems to be escalating between President Trump, between Attorney General William Barr, and of course Governor Murphy, and Attorney General in New Jersey, Gabriel Grewal, seems to be heading towards a collision course. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in the weeks and months ahead, but you have to assume that the federal government's going to win out here. Because at the end of the day, I get it, states' rights, autonomy, it's important. But folks, federal law supersedes state law. And if the federal government feels that these sanctuary state policies are violating federal law, guess what? Washington has every right and prerogative to deny federal funding. But the problem, though, is that once this federal funding is denied, let's say to states like New Jersey, right, who are being scrutinized because of sanctuary state policies, well, guess what's going to happen? Governor Murphy is going to feel the need to raise taxes because that money has to come from somewhere. So you know what? While they're trying to sort of perpetuate and enhance this sort of climate to help illegals, especially when it comes to getting driver's licenses, which I've talked about on this show is a horrendous idea for multiple reasons. The problem is that, you know what, with the federal government now choosing to deny federal funding, Governor Murphy's going to have to find that revenue stream from somewhere. And at the end of the day, it's taxpayers like you and I that are going to have to flip the bill. And I don't think that's fair. And I think it's something that we should sort of keep an eye on. But without a doubt, folks, I don't think that this sort of legislation will pass in the House. It can certainly pass it in the Republican-controlled Senate, but it might just die on Capitol Hill. We'll find out what happens in the weeks and months ahead. But folks, unquestionably, I think it's something to keep an eye on because, as I said before, federal funding is important. A lot of these criminal justice initiatives here in New Jersey help multiple communities. And if the federal government's not going to fund it, well, they're within their providence. And at the same time, what's Governor Murphy going to do? Should he follow federal law? Because, no offense, when he took the oath of office, it's about following the Constitution, not just in New Jersey, but also the United States Constitution. And right now, a lot of New Jerseyans will feel he's not doing that. Another name that really resonates and generates a lot of attention and discussion in Hudson County, folks, is indeed Katie Brennan. Now, this past week, via her attorneys, and as reported by my good friends at Insider NJ, Katie Brennan laid out some policy reform recommendations to address sexual violence and harassment within the New Jersey political spectrum. Now, just to sort of give you a perspective here, folks, this past week, Katie Brennan, via her attorney, plans to present to the Weinberg Working Group in the committee some very interesting policy recommendations about addressing misogyny, harassment, and of course, sexual violence. Now, again, sexual assault survivor Katie Brennan laid out a list of policy recommendations to improve the criminal justice process for victims of harassment, for victims of sexual assault, and also sexual misconduct in New Jersey in a letter that was issued to State Senator Loretta Weinberg out of Bergen County and members of the Work Group on Harassment, Assault, and Misogyny in New Jersey, which was just formed in Trenton last week. Now, Brennan, who has advocated for sweeping policy changes since coming forward in October of 2018 about her own sort of sexual assault by senior Phil Murphy campaign and administrative staffer Al Alvarez, also said she would like to be present during the work group committee about her proposals when their hearings begin next month. Now, Brennan's recommendations were sent via her attorney, Catherine McClure of Smith Eibler LLC out of Central Jersey. And the focus really is on prosecutorial reform, law enforcement reform, judicial and court reform, as well as the reform for political campaigns and how they respond to sexual assault, to sexual harassment, to discrimination, and acts of retaliation, in addition to reforms to state policy around workplace harassment and discrimination. Now, listen, folks, again, Katie Brennan, and that name has generated a lot of discussion and debate here, not just in Hudson County, but throughout the state of New Jersey. Of course, as you all know, Katie Brennan was the sexual assault survivor working for the Murphy campaign going back to 2017. But her story was made public in the Wall Street Journal in October of 2018, and since then, her name has really generated a buzz, not just in Trenton, but throughout all of New Jersey's 21 counties. Without a doubt, folks, let's see what happens when Katie Brennan makes herself available in front of the committee starting next month. But without a doubt, you know what? There's a lot to be said about reforms when it comes to workplace violence, to sexual assaults, to harassment in the workplace, and much, much more. We'll see what she has to say when she faces the committee, but without a doubt, Katie Brennan, as you can tell, is not staying quiet. And of course, I know that many residents in Hudson County, even throughout the state, have expressed some sort of skepticism about Katie Brennan's story. Listen, I'm not here to be judge or jury about the case. I've read about it, I've read transcripts, and listen, you can make your own determination as well. And we've talked about the Katie Brennan case at length here on this program before. But let's see what happens in terms of these policy recommendations and whether or not they're actually going to make a difference in Trenton and really throughout the political culture, folks, that permeates throughout the state of New Jersey. Again, we'll see what happens with this committee led by State Senator Loretta Weinberg. She's feisty, she's fiery, and she's going to have a lot to say as she's trying to sort of put forth some sound policy reform in the weeks and months ahead. So we'll find out what happens, and we'll keep you posted right here on the program as this story continues to develop each and every day. And that's our show for this week. To check out all the excellent programming offered by the Hudson Media Group, go to their websites, www.hmgtvshows.com and also www.livestream.com/HMGTV. Now, the Hudson Media Group is also proud to partner with NJ On Air to air this program, so check out their website at www.njonair.com. And of course, don't forget to like the Hudson Media Group and NJ On Air on Facebook, and of course, follow their Instagram and Twitter pages, respectively. And don't forget that on every Wednesday night live at 9 p.m., you can listen to the 3-time award-winning podcast, Talking the Hudson, by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/Talking the Hudson from any PC, Mac, smartphone, or tablet. And folks, don't forget, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, it's Talking Politics. I'm Fernando Uribe, right here with the Hudson Media Group.
Don't forget to catch Fernando's podcast at blogtalkradio.com/talkonthehudson. New episodes available every Wednesday night at 9 p.m.